we'll start in the general certification area. What is it? How is it? Why is it done? And so on. Then we'll go through the main acronyms that are very often mentioned in our project: ISO, MDR, and FDA. We'll try to undemonize them, get to explain how they work and how they can affect our work. So first of all, why do we certify things? So basically, when we have stuff that is potentially very harmful to people and can cause a lot of damage while using carelessly, governments decided that we should certify those things and regulate these areas. So basically, medical devices, automotive, aerospace, and so on. We have many branches of technology that are requiring some kind of certifications, and they are building trust in these products. Because, for example, if you are buying a medical device, or I don't know, you are buying a car, you don't need to think whether it is safe or not, whether it is okay to drive it on our streets. You just know that it is fine. So in these areas, we decided that we will prioritize safety over novelty, and we'll only make improvements basing on proven facts, knowledge, and we will think before putting something new in these areas. We have areas that require only voluntary certification, like, I don't know, food, because you can buy food from a local farmer and it doesn't have to be certified. But when you buy a fruit from the market, then you see these stamps with different certifications. And in MedTech, certification is compulsory. So if somebody is using, it means that not only selling, but also using, giving somebody anything to do with a medical device without a proper certification, you can go to prison, actually. So it is very important to know these procedures, these standards. We don't put these devices on the market, but for our clients, it is very important. And of course, I just need to know that today I will talk only about the EU and the US, because basically, if you meet these regulations, the rest of the world will be happy and they will comply with it. So we have three main areas that are important for us. First of all, ISO. So International Organization for Standardization. They create ways of how to do things in technology. You have standards for everything, even for measuring time, calendar, automotive, aerospace, everything has ISO standards. Then you have MDR, so Medical Device Regulation, which is a legal act that is determining how medical devices operate in the EU. So it is actually most important for us, for our area. Poland is under it. So after a device is, after the MDR audit, it gets a CE mark. So it's not only applicable to medical devices. You have it on toys, on cars, but when you see a medical device with this mark, it means that it passed the MDR certification. And last but not least, FDA. It is similar to MDR, but in the US. It is called the Food and Drug Administration. It is a US government agency, because MDR is regulation, FDA is the agency, but both are related to the certifications. So if you are FDA certified, you can operate in the US market as a medical device. So let's start with ISO. They operate from Geneva, Switzerland, regulating things since 1947. You had different standardization organizations before. They organized in one global one, ISO. You have different committees developing standard for certain tech operations, and they have developed more than 26,000 standards. So, as I said, they have something for everybody. And companies can decide, okay, we want to do our work in the way of this standard. But there was a question, okay, so if I operate in these standards, how can I prove to my clients that it is real, that I'm obliged by these standards, but how do they know? So then ISO decided that they will go with the certification. So basically, they are giving accreditation to notified bodies, like our notified body, LAROC, and then these notified bodies can audit companies. And then after this kind of audit, they give a certificate that this company is meeting the standard developed by ISO. And then if a company like us, we have ISO 13485 certificate, then our certificate means that we are meeting the standards, that these rules are applied in our company. So that's why it is important to know that these actions actually mean something. So if you have somebody that has a certification, certain stamp, standard, then it means that okay, it was checked by somebody. And right now, okay, I know it will be maybe boring from a hindsight, from the beginning, but actually it is important maybe not to remember, but to know that these areas are important in our branch. Because, for example, ISO 13485 is our certificate that we have in the company, and it is concerning quality management systems for medical devices. So actually, it can cover anything from syringes, gloves, I don't know, tomographs, medical applications, EEG devices, anything you can think of will be covered by this standard. So it's actually defining how companies work and develop medical devices. And then we have different standards for showing how these devices operate and how to do some specific stuff. That's why usually people are only certifying with this standard, and rest is only implemented by their actions. Like ISO 14971, which we also implement indirectly, which means that risk management should be done in a certain way. And this standard tells how to do this risk analysis and risk management in medical devices. So we have it implemented indirectly, but we don't need to be certified for it because we're just doing it the way the standard says so. Same applies to ISO 62304, which is related to software development cycle in medical devices. And this is something that we also need to implement while developing a medical device. But it is a specific standard covered also in the huge area, which is ISO 13485. One that also may be interesting for our designers is 62366, which is usability. And it is actually determining how to check and verify the usability of medical devices. Very complicated standard. These tests are usually very expensive, but also very important for developing a medical device. And finally, 60601, a group of standards for electromedical devices. It will not apply directly to us, but for example, in the projects where we have application or some kind of software communicating with a hardware, this hardware will need to meet standards from this group. So for example, in the MyOVU project that was mentioned recently, they surely meet standards from this group. Also, fun fact, my favorite standard is from this group. And yes, I'm this kind of person that has a favorite ISO standard. If you want to talk more about this, we can do so in the Q&A. But yeah, there are people like that. And ISO covers general area of standards from everything. But now let's focus on medical devices in the EU, especially MDR. How does it work? So we have a regulation done by European Parliament and Council that is in force in the whole EU area. And this regulation tells us how medical devices should be certified in our countries. And it is not doing it directly. There is no like one institution like FDA in the US there are notified bodies, which are actually private companies, that are getting accreditation from the not EU directly, but local governments, that they can perform MDR certification. So we also have this kind of units in Poland. Companies go to these notified bodies. It is a similar process like in the ISO, but with one stage above, because EU is not doing accreditation directly, but offices in countries are doing it themselves. And with MDR, have the certification should be done. We have decided that, okay, we have ISO standards, which are voluntary, but they're good. So we can tell manufacturers, okay, just oblige this, and this standard, and it will be fine. So we have a list of harmonized standards that should be applied in order to get MDR. Apart from that, we have guidances that fill the gaps that were created between these standards. So if a standard doesn't cover everything, we have MDCG guidances that will fill these gaps. And also, there is some relation to IVDR, in vitro diagnostic regulation. They are often mentioned together. So just to not confuse you, MDR is for us, IVDR is for diagnostic equipment. And one important thing that will also affect the process, each medical device is categorized in a class by the risk they are creating. So we have class 1, 2A, 2B, and 3. And if the class is higher, the risk is also higher. So therefore, more regulatory needs are required to be met. So for example, more documentation, more strict testing, more clinical validation, and so on. And basically, this is the schematics of how does it work. So we have European Parliament that decided that we have some kind of ISO standards that should be applied in MDR, because they didn't want to reinvent the wheel. If some standards are okay, let's apply them. Also, we have guidances that are filling the gaps, and we have the MDR that is in force in the EU. Then we have national offices in each country. In Poland, it's called Urząd Rejestracji Produktów Leczniczych, Wyrobów Medycznych i Produktów Biobójczych. Nobody remembered that name. Everybody calls them URPL. And this is an acronym that you probably will hear. And they are giving accreditation to notified bodies. In Poland, we have two, TIFNORD and PCBC. You don't have to use a notified body from your country. So this is the case for Momentum. We are using LAROC, which is from the UK, and that's fine. You just need to have a notified body that is accredited in the EU. That's why also TIFNORD and PCBC are doing audits in whole Europe. And they are certifying medical devices from manufacturers. They're also doing other stuff like certifying by ISO standards, by other regulated areas. But to be able to do MDR, only these two bodies are accredited for that. And now let's dive into MDR certification process. Just kidding, we'll not do it. I would bore you to death. But I just want to show you that the process itself is very complicated. It has a lot of stages. It requires a lot of documentation. The more contact with the body, the more risk is connected with the device, the more documentation you need. But just to make it very, very simple, this is actually the simplest way I was able to chart it. So if you want to certify a device, for example, let's start with our open wearables. I think it will be a good example. We need to determine what is the device, what is the usage, what is the class, what it will do in general. So with open wearables, we will have an application that is doing something, for example, with diagnosing heart problems based on the signals from wearables. It also assumes that you have a quality management system implemented in your company. So basically, if you do not have quality management system, you cannot develop a medical device, which may be a problem for some companies. Then you decide what standards are applicable for you and what are the requirements for your device. And it is also very important because when you determine the intended use, it will affect the requirements and the standards because you will have different set of these rules for, I don't know, if you decide that it will diagnose heart problems or, I don't know, sleeping disorders, then you will have different requirements and different standards. And then this is here very simplified, but you need to then develop what you have planned in the quality management system regime, of course, doing documentation in parallel. And we need to prepare all the required documentation in this process to document not only the device, but the process itself. Then, when you finish the product, you do the testing. Also, if you have a hardware, you need to do testing in accredited laboratories. And then, after having all the documentation you need, you can apply for an MDR audit. And it is divided into two parts. First, they check your quality management system and they check whether you are doing things in the right way in general in your company. And then they check whether this certain device is correctly designed, manufactured, and developed by you. So here you have a lot of meetings, a lot of documentation is required. So the audits themselves will take some time. But if you finish them positively, you will get a certificate. And just one note, this process, depending on the device class, may take even up to 2 years because queues in the notified bodies are very long right now. But of course, it can be, I don't know, half a year, 3 months. It depends on the notified body, what device do you have, class, etc. But also, it may cost even a couple hundreds of thousands of zlotys. So it's also something that our clients usually are taking into account. But now let's move to the other side of the ocean, how they do it in the US. So in the US, we have FDA, Food and Drug Administration, and FDA decided that they will do everything themselves. So they have no notified bodies, no private companies operating in their area. They are just setting the standards and checking whether people are meeting the standards they set. So the procedures are generally similar to MDR. Also, the audit, the preparation, the ISO, the guidances, etc. It's very similar, but they implemented different standards because, of course, they have their own American standardization documents. They are sometimes the same as ISO, sometimes different. Sometimes they removed ANSI to implement ISO, sometimes not. So they may have been some changes in the standards that are required to be met. Also, their guidances are not only filling the gaps like in the EU, but they influence the standards. So you may have a situation that you implement a standard, you say, okay, I'm doing everything according to a standard, and then you apply to FDA, and FDA said, hey, this standard is harmonized, but we have changed it in this, and this area, in this guidance, and you should follow our guidance. So it is very important to also implement their guidances and know what they are recommending for applying the standards. And what is also interesting, that I would say contradictory, that FDA is much more influenced by the politics and much less commercialized than in the EU, because FDA is like a government institution managed by a single person who is appointed by the government, by the president. So it can make also political decision. There was one, for example, with Apple Watch, which is certified as a FDA-approved medical device and had no basis for doing so. They were lacking proper documentation, they were lacking tests, but it was Apple. They required this, documentation and certification, so they were granted. This would never happen in the EU, because in the EU, each notified body is a private company that needs to obey the law. So nobody will do this kind of stuff. So if before working in healthcare, I would say it would be otherwise, but this is the reality we are in. And for FDA, the process is also formal, but it has its own procedures and its own nomenclature, which I think is also very important to know, maybe not remember by heart, but to being acquainted with a couple of names that will be important, especially for our clients who will just say, "Hey, I will apply for 510K," and it's good to know what do they mean. So first of all, we have pre-submission, or called Q-submission or Q-sub, and it is a fairly cheap process which allows you to just exchange information with FDA. Information are not bonding, so if they answer you something, they can change their mind, but usually they follow what they decided before. So for example, you can go to them and say, "Hey, I have this device and I will do this kind of tests and I will do this kind of documentation. Will it be, I don't know, class 1 or class 2, or will I require clinical trials? If yes, which clinical trials, etc." And they usually reply really fast, and then you can use it as a basis for further development of your device. So it is actually really helpful and really preferable way to clarify things before the final development. We have 510K, which is the most common procedure, also called pre-market notification. So it means that we have a device we want to certify. We find another device that already has a certificate, which is called a predicate device. And we say our device is doing almost the same as a predicate device. You can have a couple of them, because I don't know, if you have a device that is doing 3 kind of things, you can find 3 different devices and said, "Hey, our device is doing this thing from this thing, this thing from this thing, this thing from this thing," and we are certifying it as a new FDA device. Of course, it needs to be tested. You need to have all the documentation required, but it is the easiest and the fastest way to certify a device in the US. We have another procedure which is called de novo, and it means that when you don't have a predicate, you need to start with a new documentation and prepare the case that this device is useful and that somebody will gain something in the clinical area. So it is much more complicated, usually not preferred. If you can avoid it, you do so. But sometimes, especially for a very modern devices, you need to do it. But usually, companies try to do everything to stay in the 510K application. Also, for very high-risk devices, you have PMA, pre-market approval. For I don't know, when you implant something into a human body, you need to implement much more rigorous scientific review to make sure that this device met all the standards and is very safe. So usually, if you don't need to be a class 3 device, you are not, because you need to create a lot of documentation. And for the end, I have a fun fact about all of these procedures, because there is something called predicate creep, which means that a company do one de novo application for one device, and then they are creating a lot of predicates after this one certification. So, for example, you had hip implants that have not performed the de novo application for, I don't know, 50, 60 years. Here you have a schematic for Da Vinci, which is FDA certified with 510K, and this is the map of the predicates they appointed to say that our device is nothing new. It's already known. We are using everything that is already used in healthcare. We are just taking this from this, this from this, this from this, this from this, this from this. So it may be a map like that. It doesn't mean that 510K is an easy procedure and it guarantees that somebody will be FDA certified. But in general, it is preferred, and companies, especially large ones, when they own a lot of devices, when they own a lot of products that are already developed in the market, they are doing this kind of things. And this is nothing new. This is nothing like extraordinary. It happens. And in the US, they are thinking about doing something about it, but nothing yet had happened. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.